Toilet. Down the end, toilet. Right, sauces with the water.
A broken relationship, a woman, and a murder that shook the entire region. This is the story of a wife who brutally killed her husband. But why, how, and what is the real truth behind this story? In today's video, we will tell you the full story of a woman who was found guilty by the court of murdering her husband. This tragic incident took place in a quiet, peaceful, and family-friendly area of Britain. An area where people knew each other, where they slept without locking their doors at night. In the same area lived Kyle Pugh and his wife, who were once known as a happy and loving couple. But over time, cracks began to appear in their relationship. Quarrels, distrust, and resentment. Everything increased until the point of separation. Although the two were still legally husband and wife, they had been living apart for many years. People thought that the relationship might now be completely over. But in reality, the bitter memories, accusations, and unspoken hatreds of that relationship were still alive, breathing, and waiting for a storm inside. Fights between Kyle Pugh and his wife had become routine. Sometimes bitter arguments over trivial matters, sometimes serious accusations. Their love had been replaced by resentment and suspicion. The relationship had become a battlefield where blaming each other was a daily occurrence. Divorce had been discussed many times, and friends and acquaintances were well aware of the conflict. The woman would often be seen complaining to her friends that her husband was unfaithful, that he was cheating on her, or that he was tormenting her mentally. She would say that she had sacrificed everything in life, but in return she had only received pain. But the question is, was she really true in her accusations? Was she really the victim? Or was it all just a story, an excuse, a justification for hatred, a justification that sowed the seeds of revenge in his heart? A poison that had completely killed love. It was an ordinary night. Kyle Pugh was alone in his apartment, the same apartment where he had been living since his separation. The weather outside was cold and the air was silent. A few moments passed, and then there was a knock on the door. The door opened, and standing in front was the same woman, his wife, with whom he had lived for years, and with whom now only a paper relationship remained. It is said that at first there was silence between the two, but then suddenly words became swords, bitter sentences, old grudges, and uncontrolled emotions. Once again the same old argument began. The woman was furious. Her face showed signs of grief, helplessness, and perhaps revenge. Then a loud sound was heard, perhaps a scream, perhaps pain, or perhaps the sound of death. And immediately after that, complete silence. The kind of silence that comes after a storm is past. The neighbors heard some unusual sounds and immediately called the police. When the police arrived at the scene, the door was locked from the inside. When it was broken down, the scene was heartbreaking. Kyle Pugh was lying on the floor covered in blood, his body lifeless, and the same old agony was etched on his face. His wife stood nearby, silent still, and perhaps he had no idea that she was now being seen as a murderer. The murder of Kyle Pugh sent shockwaves through the area. A man had been murdered in his own home, and that too allegedly by his wife. The police immediately sealed off the scene, and an investigation began. Bloodstains were strewn everywhere inside the flat. There were scratches on the walls, drag marks on the floor, and a kitchen knife covered in blood. The forensic team carefully collected everything, and reports soon began to suggest that this was no accident, but a deliberate murder. But what proved to be the most shocking was the CCTV footage. The camera outside the flat recorded everything. The video clearly showed that the woman entered the flat at night, and when she came out about 27 minutes later, she had bloodstains on her clothes and a look of fear, anger, and perhaps a strange comfort on her face. The video became irrefutable evidence for the court. That same night, the police arrested the woman on the spot. She remained silent during her arrest, neither denied nor confessed, just stood there with her eyes downcast. Within a few days, she was produced in court, and the formal trial began. Now the only question was this murder a premeditated plan, or a sudden emotional moment? The truth was about to be revealed in court, but the evidence had already spoken its verdict. The trial in court began under tight security. Newspapers, media, and the public. All eyes were on the case, because the case was not just about a murder, but about a wife taking a step against her husband, which was socially and morally shocking to everyone. When the woman first appeared in court, her demeanor was calm and remorseful. She declared herself innocent before the court. She said, "I did not kill. I was only protecting myself. I was afraid he would attack me. I was forced to." Her lawyer argued that Kyle Pugh had been violent in the past, and that he had threatened the woman that night, to which she had only stepped in self-defense. But on the other hand, the prosecution was in court fully prepared. They presented evidence upon evidence, CCTV footage, forensic reports, the murder weapon, and most importantly, statements from neighbors who heard the anger in the woman's voice and the victim's final screams. The prosecution said this murder was no coincidence. It was a well-thought-out conspiracy. The woman had been planning for days. She knew Kyle Pugh was alone and would have no means of resistance. For 3 weeks, the court heard witness statements, cross-examined lawyers, and presented evidence. At the end of each day, a new aspect of the story emerged. Sometimes sympathy, sometimes suspicion, sometimes anger. Finally, after 3 weeks of trial, the jury delivered a verdict. And the verdict was life-changing for the woman. The jury unanimously found the woman guilty of the intentional murder of her slain husband, Kyle Pugh. The court wrote in its decision, this murder was not committed out of emotion, but as part of a well-planned plan. The defendant intentionally took the life of her husband, and the court sentences her to that act. After the jury delivered its verdict, the courtroom was filled with solemnity. The judge, after a formal court hearing, found the woman guilty of murder. While delivering the verdict, the judge said that the crime was committed seriously and had no place in society. The court therefore sentenced the accused to life imprisonment, which means that she will spend most of her life in prison. The family of the deceased Kyle Pugh happily accepted the court's verdict and considered it a complete expression of justice. They said that justice had finally been served and their loved one's killer was found to have deserved punishment. They were satisfied with the court's verdict and hoped that this sentence would prevent such incidents. On the other hand, preparations have begun for the woman to appeal against the decision. The lawyers claim that the facts of the case were not fully presented, and they will request the court to give the accused another chance to re-examine the facts. When and how this appeal will be heard in court will be decided in the next few months. But for now, the court's decision seems to be the final and most difficult stage in the story of this incident. It was a bitter end, one that ended a broken relationship forever and plunged a man's life into darkness, perhaps forever. Love, which is sometimes the most beautiful feeling in life, when it turns into hate, the result is often painful and devastating. This is not just a story of murder, but a tragic story of a broken relationship with emotions, betrayal, hatred, and injustice hidden in every layer. This story reminds us that when love fades and turns into hate, its effects are not limited to just two individuals, but shake families, friends, and the entire society. The end of Muja and his wife's life teaches us that the pain and bitterness of a failed relationship can sometimes be so intense that only death can be the means of judgment. This is a reality that cannot be ignored and from which we must learn a lesson. Let us all work together to spread awareness to prevent such incidents, so that love can be saved from turning into hate, and such a tragic end can be avoided. If you liked our story and want to hear more such thrilling, interesting and factual events, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We will keep bringing you new, informative and quality documentary videos every day that will take you closer to the facts. And now we want to know from you, do you think this murder was really planned in advance? Or was it an emotional outburst? Do share your opinion in the comments below, because your thoughts are very valuable to us.